afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and this week on the Roundup, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week, we take our questions that we ask here on Wednesday from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And in case you're wondering, you've heard it twice already, SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting. That's a consulting company I created in 2014 after I left my work at Education USA. And we've been doing these midweek roundups since, let's see, it's going on almost 6 years this fall, that we've been coming to you live on Wednesday afternoons to present the questions and our in-depth thoughts on how these questions and answers might impact what we do in international education. Started the newsletter about the same time in about October of 2018. So we're coming up on 6-year anniversary of the newsletter and the roundup in the coming months. So be sure to stay tuned for episode 300, which will be coming up later this fall, perhaps from the US, perhaps from an undisclosed location overseas. We'll see where the travels take us this fall. But for now, let's get into our 3 questions. For those, again, who are looking for our newsletter link, we provide that on our newsletter on our website that you can subscribe to via email, and that is available at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. Dropping the link into the live chat on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And I'll drop the link into this week's edition of that newsletter so you have it as well for reference purposes. It comes out at 9 a.m. Eastern if you subscribe via the website to provide you with the top stories in social media. And that social media is a broad term that I'm using to describe anything digital, including AI conversations, including upcoming webinars, SEO, social media usage, survey results, those kinds of things that can be that are generally digital in nature. The value of digital communication strategies, those types of things we cover in that section. And then we have a section on news, international ed news, that refers to what's happening here in the United States, solutions to potential problems we're facing here in the US related to international ed, and then also a global roundup of what's happening in other markets, because that's one thing we always say is very critical in international ed these days, is having a global perspective on what's happening in the wider world so that potentially you can take advantage of other countries' missteps or restrictions that they might be imposing to help you better chat about what is happening and how that might impact how you market yourself and your institution to future students. So we cover those in depth in the newsletter and then find some themes each week that we then go in depth here on the Roundup every Wednesday when we see certain themes generated around different questions that are being asked in international ed news. So that's the newsletter. The 2 versions are also, the second version is available on LinkedIn, and that is something that comes out about a half hour earlier. If you prefer to get your international ed news through LinkedIn, certainly I do, and I encourage you all to use that as part of your international edification each week. So we are very proud to say that we've just in the last day have crossed 2,000 subscribers to our newsletter, 2,000 in a combination of the LinkedIn and the email version. So we're very proud to have crossed that threshold. Thanks again for everybody in the international ed space that have made that newsletter a part of your international ed gathering news each week and our initial thoughts, hot takes on the key issues of our day. So let's get right into our questions today. First one is up. Are you paying attention to your SEO in Asia? And for those unfamiliar, SEO is search engine optimization, and our domestic admissions offices and digital marketing teams on our campuses are probably very aware of what SEO is, and have campaigns to help make your institution's digital strategies as effective as possible with keywords and meta tags and all the wonderful things that go into that, through Google mainly and Yahoo as well. But to help, and Bing, to help your institution's listings online and web pages and sites rise up in the search rankings for your name. Obviously, not everything is going to be about you. Online is going to be from your institution, but for those web portals that you control directly and social sites that list you as your institution, you want that to be ranked highly whenever someone searches for you. So in other countries, however, particularly in Asia, managing SEO is a much more unwieldy beast. Because it can differ from country to country. And there were several articles this week that we profiled in the newsletter. First up is a post from WebCertain, some great social and digital teams there talking about social media on Naver. Naver, for those unfamiliar, is kind of the equivalent of Google in Korea. And they have now 3 different ways you can use Naver to increase your SEO options in that market. So Naver Blog, Naver Post, and Naver Cafe. So there's a guide that WebCertain team has put up that I'll drop the link to in the chat. That would be well worth checking out if you have time to, or if not yourself, certainly anyone on your digital media team that is involved in these kinds of things, because that's the kind of data that that can be helpful in terms of adjusting or adapting adding some keywords in certain markets, perhaps looking eventually at locally hosted sites in certain key markets. China is one of those, Japan, Korea might be another, that you want to have that kind of opportunity or weapons in your tool belt to reach your potential student and parent audiences more directly and increase your institution's rankings in that respect. So in terms of the second one is referencing that this week is through our friends at Synorbis. Synorbis is a digital platform, digital tech company based in Asia, based actually in Australia, but it's been active in the Asian market, East Asian market for going on 10 years now. And they've started initially with a focus exclusively on China, having locally hosted websites that allowed institutions to control their markets, control their messaging on hosted sites in China that would be recognized within Baidu and other Chinese-specific search engines. That's the other topic of the day, is how with SEO in China, Baidu is one of the key platforms there, search sites there. So Synorbis had developed their programs initially through for institutions in Australia, UK, US, who were looking at China as a market to give institutions a better footprint or entry into that market. And what Synorbis has done recently is they've also have introduced a new SEO reporting add-in or add-on to their to their existing web hosting, locally web hosted sites that give institutions a chance to control their content for local audiences in the Asian market, key Asian markets. So that's something that is available if you're not already using Synorbis. You may want to look at that. The other and final one is that we'll get to. There was another one that also had this kind of specific footprint. There's an AirC webinar coming up, which we'll talk about in a little bit, related to recruitment in China. But with regard to that, in terms of SEO and those kinds of things, this is something that you need to be aware of as potentially negatively impacting your institution's digital footprint in East Asia if you're not taking into account these kinds of factors, and SEO is certainly going to be very significant one of those. So it's one that many of us in international admissions, international student recruitment, international education circles put on our wish list, because it's not something we personally will have a lot of bandwidth for, but it's certainly something you want to get in front of your digital marketing teams on your campuses to make them aware, hey, these are issues that are impacting our ability to reach future students in this part of the world. And if we don't adjust how we are positioning ourselves by having locally hosted sites, paying attention to the SEO variations in the region, that's we're losing potential opportunities to get in front of the right students at the right time. So most of us will say at our institutions we're not really paying attention to our SEO in Asia, but should we? Absolutely. If we're talking about enhancing our ability to connect with future students in our key markets, then it makes sense that someone at your institution, either within your admissions digital marketing team or institutional digital marketing team, is aware that these are issues and can perhaps be a part of a larger solution to having an institutional focus that does include, when it comes to SEO, factors of different search engine sites in different countries, different tools that might be helpful to enhance that, having through locally hosted sites, enhancing your institution's ability to expand its reach and reach students where they are when they're on. So that's the first question of the day. The second question is recruiting Chinese students changing? And I think the obvious answer to that is absolutely. It's an ever-evolving topic of discussion around conferences and with agent partners in country. We're always having that, hey, what's new in China? What's new on the ground? How are student attitudes changing? Are there things that we need to be aware of as we're developing content for that market that can be helpful? So sharing with you today, I dropped the link in for the AIRC webinar coming up on actually tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's called China Digital Recruitment, the latest on Chinese websites, ICP, local SEO, WeChat, and social campaigns. So it's going to be a one to watch tomorrow if you're not already registered. And they have both member registration and public registration options available for that. But the focus of this question really is about an article that ICEF Monitor puts out. Again, ICEF is one of the more, in terms of service providers, certainly they are known as the agent training organization. And they host their workshops around the world every year in multiple locations: Berlin, in Miami, in Vancouver, in Latin America, in Africa, in Middle East, in Asia. They held these regularly as opportunities for institutions to meet agents in key markets. But they also have had for many years their ICEF Monitor, which is sort of their reporting mechanism or arm of the organization. It reports out on some of the key trends that they see developing. There's an article that came out this past week called Market Snapshot: International Student Recruitment in China Today, and helps paint the picture of what is changing on the ground. Particularly, they talk about that Chinese outbound students the numbers are expanding again, but competition has ratcheted up significantly. Obviously, everybody's become aware in the past decade that China in the United States peaked around 2015-16, and numbers have been going down steadily since. Pandemic actually absolutely crushed those numbers in a poor way. And now we're at a situation where the numbers are starting to rebound, but everyone else and their brother around the world that are looking to expand their international student numbers in their countries and on their campuses are looking at China because next to India, it's those two will forever be number one and number two in whatever order in terms of most students sent abroad for studies, not just to the U.S. or Australia, Canada, UK, but around the world. Those are the two by far the largest single markets, and no one will ever come close to touching them, certainly in terms of one other single country. That means that there's increased competition for the students within China that are looking to go abroad. We've seen reports over the last year or two that many more families in China are impacted or having decisions made for them by the economy. The state of the economy in China has dropped off, and there's housing insecurity in terms of real estate prices. There's downturns in the economy. Post-pandemic, there's more of a need perhaps or desire to stay closer to home, parents, in terms of sending undergraduates away for studies. There's less of that push out far. It's more pushing out close, and Hong Kong has been a major benefactor in that post-pandemic transition of in Chinese students' interest levels in certain markets. That affordability, as I mentioned, is a key indicator for Chinese families. Internship opportunities, job opportunities, employability in general is significant. And if you are not including that kind of data or information in how you promote yourselves to the Chinese market, that is a missed opportunity now that perhaps was not an issue 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago pre-pandemic. And you find out quickly that in the past few years, certainly before the pandemic, Chinese students weren't staying in the United States after graduation, perhaps certainly not nearly as much as Indian students were. And the numbers in OPT and H-1B applications every year certainly reflect that, though they are still significant numbers, 10, 15% perhaps in OPT and H-1B. India clearly outnumbers probably by 3 to 4 to 1 in that respect in terms of numbers of those that stay. But that might be changing. Many more of them might be looking to stay more longer term. So we'll see where the numbers take us in that respect. So a great article from ICF Monitor. One final resource related to that comes from our friends at BridgeU. And they have a downloadable guide that talks about the International Undergraduate Recruitment Country Guide for China that has real-time data insights and counselor perspectives on emerging student trends there in China. That they share strategies for attracting Chinese students, including highlighting, again, the importance of career pathways, job opportunities, and scholarships. They look at data trends on Chinese student preferences for different countries and different academic programs, so getting a sense of what that looks like now. And finally, learn about the diversity of international schools in China and legislative changes that are affecting them. So some really good resources this past week to get your heads around through webinars and digital downloads about what's happening on the ground in China now. So always encourage colleagues to pay attention to these kinds of opportunities and educate yourself on what's happening in key markets. And China, even though our numbers might have been declining in recent years, you can't ignore that market because it's still number 2 on many college campuses, if not number 1 still. So maybe numbers are dropping, but are you doing anything to try and recapture some of that lost momentum? So the landscape is changing, and it's a matter of, are you adapting your strategies accordingly and having content that's specifically responding to the needs that the Chinese market is generally looking for at this point. So that's the second question of the day. Now let's get into our final one. And the final question today is, what is happening in Australia? And the question is, how will Australian universities deal with mandatory international student caps? And in case you haven't been watching, there's been some general caps imposed by the government, the new Labor government in Australia, that have had a 50% imposed a 50% net reduction or reduction in net migration to Australia in the past. It was implemented earlier this year or late last year, earlier this year, and that is supposed to have reduced overall migration numbers to Australia by 50%. Not all of that is specific to students, but that certainly the numbers of students that come to Australia is going to be impacted by that. We've had a tightening of restrictions in the government for which agencies or dodgy providers have been targeted and potentially squeezed out, and that's impacted a lot of the vocational and English language training sector in international ed in Australia. Not so much at the university level, but to certainly they're not immune from the reductions that have been imposed. It's for some institutions to stop recruiting students from certain countries or states within certain countries, in India, for example. So there's a lot happening in Australia that really puts a lot of fear, frankly, in the eyes and ears of Australian international educators when it comes to what the future may bring for them. And as the government's policy is evolving, there was an article we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the Roundup about that ICF put out about is it time for self-imposed international student percentage caps at different institutions. That, for example, that institution should not have more than 40% of its students, international students from any one country, and other requirements like that. And that overall institutional caps should be 30, 35% perhaps at most institutions. And we talk about capacity for a reason, because in the end, capacity issues that not just within institutions, but capacity to serve the students that are at institutions has come to the fore in every single destination market that is now restricting numbers. Canada, UK, Australia. Each of those three countries, in the certainly during the pandemic, even slightly before the pandemic, but certainly after the pandemic, have been grappling with the strain of increasing numbers of international students coming to their countries, not only on institutional classroom space, in terms of certainly housing has been a major challenge, in terms of food insecurity, in terms of there's the strain on local services, particularly with healthcare in each of those countries. That has been what has led to Canada imposing a 2-year 30% reduction on study permits generated. It led to, in the UK, a dependent visa ban for any family members of students who were studying at master's degree or below could not come with the primary student. It led to, in Australia, such an increase in concerns over housing and dodgy providers that 50% net migration cut to try and eliminate those that were coming to Australia specifically to become just get in the country and then transition to a work visa almost immediately, or certainly to a lower educational level immediately. So there's been, all of these are generally capacity issues, whether it's housing, whether it's strain on services in a particular city, on a particular campus. These are the restrictions that have led to, or the challenges within those countries have led to the governments stepping in and saying, hey, this cannot continue. We're going to take action, and it's up to you to toe the line. And that's a line that most institutions are now, for the first time, under real pressure. In the UK, there was talk of over 2/3 of institutions running a deficit by next year or two. It's causing Australian institutions to go, okay, well, maybe we do need to impose our own caps because we need to fall in line with government policy. Everybody would hope that there'd be ability to self-regulate, but the reality is institutions have survived largely on the international student dollar or pounds over the last few years. Certainly during the pandemic, that we saw why when they aren't on campus, the financial impact is quite significant. The two articles that I'm sharing, one is from University of Melbourne, talking about one-size-fits-all caps as a potential government policy. This institutional answer is it would fail Australia and fail our students. That imposing a flat 35% or 40% international student cap, as some have suggested, according to this article, will inevitably reduce the overall quality of Australia's tertiary education system. It will immediately affect the country's top-ranking universities, forcing them to cut thousands of international student places and forgo hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. The staff cuts, infrastructure upgrade deferrals, research foregone, and reductions in diversity-promoting scholarships will have to be immediate and will be lasting. So from one of the group of 8, University of Melbourne, the reaction is any cuts that are imposed, caps to our international student populations would have devastating consequences across our institution and will force massive change in terms of how, as an institution, they are able to recruit and manage their international student populations, but also institutionally, the financial impact is going to be enormous. So University of Melbourne comes out strong and swinging that, hey, this is going to cost us millions, and if not millions and millions of Australian dollars as a result of having to reduce our international student numbers significantly. Because they are, at the group of 8, they are in that 35 to 40 or 40% range of international students already as part of their populations. So to restrict that would impact them financially in a very significant way. So that is the first article. The second is more of a specific state within Australia, and that's the state of Victoria. That another article shares that caps on overseas university students could cost Victorian economy $6 billion. That's Australian. And University of Melbourne is one of those. Monash is also there. So we're talking about the financial impact on those institutions and the communities that they serve, that over 3 years, that 6 billion Australian dollars number is if the international student enrollments were cut by 30,000 under the federal government's plan to cap arrivals. So that's a University of Melbourne and Monash commissioned this research that would be the economic impact of not only almost 6 billion Australian dollars, but at least 12,000 jobs would be lost by 2027, so in the next 3 years. So the damage that could potentially be done by imposing these caps is going to be quite significant for Australian institutions, and that is the carrot or the stick that the universities want to beat the government with when it comes to, hey, you can't do this, because if you do, here's the result. We're going to lose jobs, we're going to lose economic impact in our communities, on our institutional campuses, and it will weaken us as institutions overall. So that's what Australian institutions are facing as a result of these caps that might be imposed. They've already seen losses in the vocational sector and the English language sector because of the increased scrutiny on the providers, the dodgy providers, so to speak. They've increased the amount of money that students have to show for savings in order to get the student study visa. And they are becoming stricter in terms of with concerns over plagiarism and fraudulent documents that students have been using from certain countries, certain states, certain agencies within certain countries and states that are forcing the government to act because the institutions haven't cleaned up their own game to control which agencies they're working with, even though their structures are in place to make sure that their agencies are on the up and up. Clearly, that hasn't been universally applicable. So we will see what happens with the future with the government and this balance between universities and economic impact and the government and overall health for the Australian economy, whether that will balance out at all. But certainly the governments in Canada, UK, and Australia are coming for international education as a sector and are imposing restrictions where they have been pretty much unregulated or not closely regulated for years. So we'll see long-term what the implication is, but we know when their students see restrictions, they tend to turn their interest away from certain markets. Not completely, but certainly fewer will be as eager to apply or have a country further up their list if they see a government increasing restrictions. So as of right now, the U.S. is sitting pretty. Can we take full advantage of that? That's up to the elections in November and policies that might come out of those elections. But it's also up to our individual institutions and how we talk about ourselves as institutions. We already know how to do that fairly well, but do we know how to do that well in an international context? And also, given everything else that's happening in other countries around the world, are we talking about not just our institutional advantages, but our advantages as a country that we can use to play off against some of the perceived negative situations occurring in other countries? The issues with healthcare, the issues with, even though ours is complicated, you have healthcare provided, or you're paying for it as part of your education. You have housing, almost guaranteed and even required for international students to live on campus. Our campuses are built typically for international students to come and stay and live on campus, because we have housing as really part of how we develop our campus cultures on campus, because it's a living learning environment for our students, not students where they're just commuting into town from around the area into campus each day. It's a place where students live and breathe and work for 2 to 4 years or longer, depending on how many degrees they do. So we're better built to handle more. We don't handle anywhere near 25, 35, 40% of our higher ed population being international. It's 5%, 6% max overall. Some institutions are certainly a lot higher because they've been doing it right and doing it well for a number of years. But we have much more capacity to grow our international footprint in the United States in terms of international students than our competitors in other countries. More capacity by institution, more capacity in terms of housing, more capacity in terms of classroom space. So we will not have problems that many of our competitors do have. And if we have legislation passed in the next administration that is more supportive of international students related to post-study work, potential green cards for certain disciplines or graduates of colleges, those would be game changers as well. That's not good, none of that's guaranteed, but if it were to happen, the game would be over in terms of we're already number one. Canada got close for a little bit, but they're falling off. UK and Australia got up to 800,000 or more, but they're falling off as well. So we're back on our perch, but nothing's forever in international education, and things can turn on a dime fairly quickly. So never to be complacent, but always to be on the lookout for opportunities to craft messaging that is more appealing and takes advantage of all the environmental circumstances that we have as institutions and as a country. That's all we have for you here on the Midweek Roundup. Thanks for including us in your international edification this week, and we look forward to chatting with you in the days and weeks to come.